Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Wednesday, April 22nd, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, more reaction to the Center Square's exclusive story and my colleague TJ Martinell, who received nearly 1,000 pages from the Washington Attorney General's office, from Nick Brown's office, detailing how crafters of the newly signed into law income tax worked hand in hand with the state AG for months to figure out how to avoid public input and craft a bill that would present the greatest opportunity to get the state Supreme Court to overturn nearly 100 years of precedent that says, because of our state constitution, we can't have an income tax, at least not one that isn't uniform. Now, my colleague TJ Martinell, who filed that records request and received those documents, along with my colleague Tim Clouser, unpack that exclusive story a little bit deeper in today's episode of Washington in Focus. Then we have State Senator and Congressional District 3 candidate John Braun weighing in, and the first Democrat to speak out publicly since Monday's story broke was supposed to speak with me today, Representative Mari Levitt. Apparently, she is under the weather and was unable to keep our interview appointment today. So we wish her a speedy recovery and hope to still catch up with her for comments a little later this week. She was one of the handful of Democrats who voted against the income tax. Then it's Earth Day. It's an opportune time to provide an update on efforts to reduce air pollution in overburdened communities in Washington. A portion of funding from Washington's Climate Commitment Act, the CCA, and the reason why prices are so high at the pump here in Washington, at least a large part of the reason, that money is used for grants that go to advocates in communities for projects to improve health outcomes related to pollution. But according to a new report from Washington Policy Center's Vice President for Research, Todd Myers, the vast majority of projects funded with CCA money in 2025 did absolutely nothing to reduce pollution. In fact, according to Myers, only one of the 21 projects funded with more than $8.5 million in taxpayer-funded CCA dollars did anything to reduce pollution. It's pretty shocking, the report. There's a little bit of pushback coming in late today from the State Department of Ecology. So we will get into all of that in today's episode of Washington in Focus. So let's dive in. On Monday, the Center Square broke a story that in the last 3 days has dominated headlines, not just here in Washington, but across much of the country. And that is our investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, who last week received nearly 1,000 pages, public records that were provided to him from the Office of Attorney General Nick Brown. This is relating to how Senate Bill 6346, the income tax, was crafted for months behind the scenes with the lead sponsor, Senator Jamie Peterson, and the AG's office. According to opponents of the income tax, some of what is revealed in those documents is potentially highly unethical and could potentially impact some of the legal challenges or the other challenges that may go to voters later this year. Many say this buoys the arguments for critics who have for months said that crafters were doing all they could behind the scenes to keep the public from having a voice in the process, as voters have many times rejected the income tax. So for more on this groundbreaking story, here are my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clouser.
Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clouser, here with the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, talking about a recent breaking story of his involving hundreds of pages of records from the State Attorney General's office, discussing with the Senate Majority Leader how to potentially overturn a state Supreme Court ruling recognizing income as property as a way to push a graduated progressive income tax potentially onto residents like you and I. TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about the records that you got and how opponents to the millionaire's tax are responding?
Well, I mean, what happened is I got public records back. I filed a public records request requesting communications within the Attorney General's office regarding the legality of the millionaire's tax. I was really curious to see what emails they were getting from people saying, "Hey, is this thing legal? Is this going to survive a court challenge?" All this stuff. Just there was a lot of questions, and they're the top you know attorneys for state agencies and all that kind of stuff. So they're going to be issuing legal opinions or giving legal advice. So the other day, I got a massive batch of records, and it was internal communications within the Attorney General's office. It was also communications with them, and primarily Senator Jamie Peterson about his millionaire's tax. And what is so remarkable about these records is that they were very, very explicit and very, very precise about what the purpose of the bill is. And so in normal world, you introduce a bill like a tax, and it's intended to tax certain types of activities, and it's intended to raise revenue for certain types of programs. That's the purpose, on the surface, on paper. But in these emails, he made it clear that the purpose of him introducing this bill is not to impose a tax on millionaires, and it's not intended to fund these programs. It's intended to overturn a century's worth of legal precedent in which income is considered property under our state constitution. And what that means is you cannot have a progressive income tax in our state. You can have a flat rate income tax that's below 1%, but you cannot have a progressive income tax where different incomes are taxed at different levels. And that's due to a provision in our state constitution that was added in the 1930s. And advocates for that amendment at the time said the reason for the amendment was so that they could tax income as a separate class of property than land. So they're trying to get this precedent overturned, in which every single Supreme Court that has ever existed in Washington state history since this ruling has said income is property. They even said at one point in a ruling, we're done having this conversation. If you want a progressive income tax, go to the voters. And so this is the purpose of this bill. This has completely destroyed any advocacy for this millionaire's tax that is only going to apply to the wealthy, and it's making the wealthy pay their fair share, whatever that means. That's gone. No one can say that, because we have emails from the prime sponsor himself saying the purpose of this bill is to overturn a legal case law of a century so that we can impose a progressive income tax that could apply to every single person in the state that makes income, and we can tax them at any rate that we want. So that's that's pretty much what's happening. And the Attorney General's office was very much I just, for lack of a better word, they were very much in favor of helping this outcome. And that's kind of what muddles the waters a little bit, is that it's not as if they gave legal advice from a neutral perspective of, we don't know if this is legal or if it'll stand up. I mean, they did say, we don't know if the Supreme Court will rule in your favor, but we agree that we do not believe that income is property. That was the legal opinion of the Attorney General's office as it exists right now. So
it's interesting because the House and the Senate, they have their own lawyers. The AGO is the people's lawyer. They represent us, the residents of the state of Washington. They're supposed to be upholding and defending the Constitution. But here you have records showing AGO staff directing or coaching the state Democratic leaders on how to potentially pose this question to the Supreme Court.
Right.
Not saying that they can directly overturn it themselves, but how do they get this to the Supreme Court? And you're saying this is a millionaire's tax, but it's not intended as a tax on millionaire. It's intended as a test run to get this before residents like you and I and others that don't make $1 million.
Right.
That was asked of the state Democratic leaders repeatedly throughout the last session, was that, will this hit everyday Washingtonians next year or the year after? And their answer was repeatedly, we don't want to bind future legislatures. That's not our job. And now you have these records saying, where Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson said himself, I would like the 9.9% tax rate to just be the start.
Yes. I mean,
who's next?
Well, and I think that they say they don't want to bind future legislatures. Well, okay, then you don't say this only applies to the millionaires. I mean, if you can change a law, then there's that saying, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. there's nothing more temporary than a tax uh, that's applied only to specific people. The IRS income tax, the federal income tax, only applied to the very wealthy when it was first introduced, and now, as we all know, pretty much everyone has to file an income tax return. And there's an entire legal industry that is dedicated to navigating the IRS tax code. And theoretically, we could see that happen here. And I think that's part of not to uh, go too far off on a tangent, but I think going back, the one thing that I found really unsettling with the Attorney General's office is when Solicitor General Noah Purcell noted to Jamie Peterson that his bill did not have an emergency clause. And so emergency clauses, for people who don't know, does two things. The bill takes effect immediately upon the governor's signature rather than 90 days. Two, it prevents a referendum from being run where voters get to weigh in on whether to uphold or reject that bill in the November election. And so he literally says in the email, if you don't have this, there could be a referendum run against it. And that begs the question of, so what you're saying is the voters would overturn this yet again, which they've done 10 times over decades since this Supreme Court decision. I mean, Initiative 1098 would have imposed a progressive income tax in 2010. It was it was decisively defeated. I think there was only a couple precincts in Seattle that voted in favor of it, like these hardcore areas, but everywhere else it was overwhelmingly rejected by voters, which is why they've turned to these legal maneuvers, because they know if they go, frankly, it's very obvious. If they thought voters supported this, they would go to voters.
Yeah, these are lawmakers that are supposed to be representing the people. The Democrats, they hold the majority in both chambers of the legislature, yet they don't want to allow their own constituents the ability to weigh in on this. And should they pass it? Okay, at least they gave the voters a chance, but they're trying to stop them. And now you have organizations like Let's Go Washington with a case expedited to the Supreme Court
Right.
to potentially allow a referendum later this month or next month. But at the same time, we have another case going on, I believe, in Thurston County or somewhere down towards Olympia to potentially block the implementation of this income tax, this millionaire's tax. And that could take months to a year or more. And
Yeah.
it's destined to hit the state Supreme Court, which is where things are really going to get interesting, TJ, because one of the governor's recent appointees, Colleen Medley, she'll be up for election later this year, so maybe she'll leave the bench before the case reaches the Supreme Court. But Noah Purcell, who you mentioned, in January, he came out and said he gave the strongest endorsement possible of Colleen Medley. But meanwhile, he's in the background coaching lawmakers on how to overturn this tax. And now they're putting a justice on the Supreme Court who worked with Purcell, who worked with Ferguson when he was attorney general, who is aligned with them and could potentially rule in favor of this tax.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what's going on. And what's so funny about him saying that we need an emergency clause is that the tax doesn't take effect until 2028, and the state doesn't begin collecting revenue until 2029. So we're talking 3 years before the state starts seeing any revenue from this. So what's the emergency? If this was an emergency, the tax would you would begin collecting the tax as soon as possible. If that was so important. I think the other thing I mean, there's so many different things to be said about this discovery and these records and this, because let's say it goes all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court just says, you know what? I don't know what you guys aren't getting. Income is property in Washington state. Stop. We're done. Great. Now the tax is overturned. How much money has been wasted on this bill? And not to mention the fact that how many millionaires have already left the state and will never come back.
Mhm.
Like how much is this going to cost? Not just taxpayers, but it's going to cost the state revenue when the real estate excise tax goes downhill because nobody wants to buy a home over certain amounts of money that generates a lot of the revenue because they're like, I have tons of money. And then they proposed a wealth tax in the past, which I also got the legal memo for as part of this public records about whether or not a wealth tax could survive legal scrutiny. I mean, you've already had Jeff Bezos leave the state, move to Florida, sell his stock, and reap the rewards, and the state didn't get a penny. And this was before the income tax. And then the Starbucks CEO is leaving or has announced he's leaving the state. And they just announced today that Starbucks is opening up a headquarters in Nashville. I mean, I don't think they fully, either they do and they don't care, or there's another reason, or they don't understand that people are leaving. And the tech sector
Uh,
is what has propelled Washington's economy from being kind of just ho hum in the 2010s to being one of the big powerhouses in the country. I mean, a couple of years ago, Washington State was just flying high as far as tax revenue was concerned, the economy, and there was jobs everywhere. And downtown Seattle was being basically transformed because of the economic boom. How many cranes were in the air when activity was going on, and now you're having corporations like Starbucks moving in response, potentially in response to this kind of stuff. So it's just what's the unseen cost of this legal maneuver? Because we can't even, it's not even appropriate to call it a millionaire's tax anymore, because they're not collecting revenue for 3 years, and its actual purpose, by the prime bill sponsor's own words, is to overturn a legal precedent. So which means as soon as that legal precedent is overturned, they're going to go back and change the tax. They're going to change who it applies to, and they're going to change what the rate is. So like I said, these records have completely destroyed advocacy of this tax as a tax, because it's not.
mm. It's a pivotal moment in state history, and the outcome now rests in the hands of the state Supreme Court when they potentially rule on the constitutionality of this income tax later this year or next year. For the audience listening, 5 of those 9 Supreme Court seats are up for election this fall, with a few conservative challengers entering the
Mhm.
race, kind of giving residents an option to weigh in through the ballot on the income tax before a potential referendum comes up, should it. But TJ, I appreciate you covering this. It's something we'll keep our eyes on the months ahead, especially as those Supreme Court elections come up. But for anyone hoping to catch that coverage, you can read it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
Now, also breaking today, Let's Go Washington has filed a supplemental brief to their upcoming case challenging the constitutionality of Governor Ferguson's income tax to block a referendum. Now, the brief that's been filed today asks the state Supreme Court to consider these documents that TJ Martinell obtained from the AG's office, basically saying that the documents that are provided make it clear in Let's Go Washington's terms that the documentation is pertinent to their case against the emergency clause. Now, you remember the emergency clause is attached, or the necessity clause in this case was attached to Senate Bill 6346 to basically make it referendum proof so that voters don't get a chance to weigh in unless it ends up being a citizen initiative. Now, Solicitor General Noah Purcell is the one who wrote in some of these documents and communications with Senator Peterson. And I'll put up this graphic to show you here what Let's Go Washington is pointing to. They say, last but not least, unless I missed it, I did not see an emergency clause. This again is from Noah Purcell in an email response to Senator Peterson. Without one, someone could try to subject the bill to a referendum. It should not be subject to referendum because it raises revenue, but under the Secretary of State's longstanding practice, they only reject proposed referenda if the bill has an emergency clause. So someone would have to sue to prevent a referendum. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Again, those are the words of Noah Purcell in a written email to Senator Jamie Peterson, the chief sponsor behind Senate Bill 6346. So Let's Go Washington is suggesting that this exchange proves that the AG's office was basically, in their words, conspiring with Senator Peterson to find the most efficient and effective way to work around the confines of the state constitution and work around having the people get a chance to have their voices heard in this process. Now, to further reaction, we have been making great efforts to get Democrats to weigh in since this story broke on Monday, especially the Democrats who voted against the income tax. And there were several of them I think there were 7 or 8, at least on the House side. I did have an interview scheduled today with Representative Mari Levitt, who was a no vote on the income tax. She's a Democrat. She had to cancel at the last moment. I was told that she was not feeling well. We are hoping to reschedule with her because we want to hear what Democrats have to say about all these documents that have been provided by the AG's office related to how this income tax was crafted. But for now, it has only been Republicans that have been more than happy to talk about this. And I had a conversation late on Tuesday with Senate Minority Leader John Braun to get his reaction to the documents we obtained. He expressed being, he said, shocked, but not at all surprised. And he said, very clear from what he has seen of the communications between the AG's office and Senator Peterson, he believes, in fact, the goal was, as they have speculated for months, um, to craft a bill that would change almost 100 years of state Supreme Court precedent and to keep voters out of the process.
It's not clear that there was anything illegal done, but certainly improper, or at least not respectful of the voters. You could say that all day long. This is the Attorney General, the person responsible for defending the state in this case, not just not just checking the language to make sure it's implementable, but actually writing some of the language. I mean, as at least a little bit I saw seemed to imply that the Attorney General at least wrote the first version of the intents section of the bill. That's a really big deal. I mean, it's not unusual for in Democrats and Republicans to share bill language with the Attorney General to get a legal evaluation, but for them to step into the middle of crafting the bill, writing the language, that seems, to me, seems inappropriate, especially when they're going to be tasked with defending it long term in front of the state Supreme Court. So, yeah, this just seems, again, it's a kind of an inside look at the raw political power that the Democratic elite, the Democratic majority leaders are Democratic leaders are willing to use to get their way and to stand in the way of what the historic opposition of voters in our state to this type of attacks. It's not that they asked the Attorney General for their opinion. It's the depth of this conversation. Not like, hey, we got a bill, we just check it. It's like we have proposed parts of the bill coming to the legislature from the Attorney General. That's a whole different level. And that's what I mean when helping people understand just how unusual this is and how much. And then I still think the biggest part is just, and it confirms what we've been saying, is they're willing to just disregard the will of the people and actively work against it to keep this from coming to a vote of the people. And if it comes to a vote of the people, come to a vote of the people in a way that they can weigh in most forcefully to keep, to get the decision they want. You remember, unless the Supreme Court decides on this current litigation, that there will be no referendum. And if there's an initiative, the Attorney General also has a role in that. He gets to help decide the title, helps to, they help, and of course, state government puts together the financial impact statement. All of this we've seen in the past, they have used to bias voters in the direction they want them to go. So they're using every tool in the toolbox, everything, and frankly, the toolbox they built themselves with legislation to get, to shape this in a way to hopefully get the voters to say, yes, we now, after 10 tries, we now, they now collectively want an income tax. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the voters are smarter than that, but I think we have work to do in getting this information out to people around the state.
Now, Senator Braun, who is running to unseat Democratic incumbent Marie Gluesenkamp Perez in Southwest Washington's 3rd congressional district, he said really the job of Republicans between now and November, assuming there ends up being either a referendum or a citizen initiative on the ballot, is going to be to educate the public on all of this because the other side is certainly rallying their troops. I was sent a video from Invest in Washington Now, a Zoom conference, I believe, that was held early this week, titled Activist Training, where they are strategizing really how to make sure that people know how good the income tax is, in their opinion, for all Washingtonians. They had Representative April Berg on there. She's the one who authored the amended version of the bill that ultimately was signed into law. in that Zoom interview, or that Zoom, I should say, activist training seminar that was held by Millionaires Tax supporters, Representative Berg was saying, we need to make sure everybody knows that everybody's a winner with the income tax, especially because of the expansion of the working Washington families tax credit. It's going to be expanded to a whole bunch of people. And there were groups on that Zoom. I want to say the WEA, the Washington Education Association, that's the state teachers union. SEIU 775 was in there. They're a big part of all this. Of course, Invest in Washington now is the group that was behind that. And then the Economic Opportunity Institute, and others. So they're going to be pouring everything into a campaign to convince voters not to repeal the income tax. So, as Senator Braun said, those who hope to repeal need to get equally organized and get that education campaign going right away. And now to Earth Day. It is Earth Day, in case you didn't know that. Time to provide an update on efforts to reduce air pollution, especially in overburdened communities in our state. So, a portion of funding from Washington's Climate Commitment Act, the CCA, is used for grants that are awarded to advocates and communities for projects to improve health outcomes. Some of these communities where air pollution is worse, you've got, lower income folks, higher rates of asthma, and other issues that could be related to pollutants in the air. So, part of the CCA money is awarded to these folks who apply for these grants and receive taxpayer subsidies. But according to a report from Washington Policy Center's Vice President for Research, Todd Myers, the vast majority of projects that were funded with CCA money in 2025 did absolutely nothing to reduce pollution.
So one of the main arguments for the Climate Commitment Act, the CO2 tax, is that it wouldn't just go to fight climate change, that it would also improve air quality, especially in what they call overburdened communities. And there's a number of communities that they've identified. And so they said in the original law, there was $20 million a biennium that was dedicated toward grants that improved air quality in these communities. So I thought I would look at what those projects were actually funded, and did they improve air quality. And so last year, about $8.5 million was granted to a variety of programs that were all under the heading of improving air quality in disadvantaged and overburdened communities. And what I found is that all but one of them, there were 21 projects, all but one of them either did nothing to reduce air pollution in those communities, or did something that, is sort of nebulous and very small impact. In the worst examples, there were projects that were simply about community outreach. Do a community outreach program. So, for example, the Urban League of Seattle got $411,000 only for community outreach. And in their own budget that they sent along, 80% of the money went to their staff and 20% of the money went to overhead. Another one that was just community outreach was from the Somali Independent Business Alliance. They got $170,000, again, just to do community outreach. Neither of those programs actually improved air quality in their communities for the people that they say are suffering with asthma and other problems. It was just all public meetings. And you see that again and again in these programs, which is that special interest groups are paid to do, quote, outreach, and no improvement in air quality actually occurs.
I did reach out to the Seattle Urban League and also the Somali Business Alliance, two of the recipients, for comment, but did not receive a response. I am anticipating a formal response from the Washington Department of Ecology before my article publishes later today. So that will be included in the published article. But an initial conversation with a communications member in the Office of the Department of Ecology suggested that they are going to refute Todd Myers' report and say that he got his numbers wrong, that he maybe put in some of the numbers from applicants who didn't necessarily receive as much as he is saying that they did. Myers has a response to that, basically says he took all of the information off of grant recipients right off of the Department of Ecology's website, information that he was able to obtain, and spoke, he says, to many of those recipients himself to find out, what'd you do with the money? And many, as you just heard in that cut from that interview with Todd Myers, suggested that really they just ran education campaigns, maybe did a little bit of community outreach, but zero tangible results impacting, how climate goals, if you will. He told me, Todd Myers said that the real problem he believes is the way that this entire program from ecology is basically sold to would be grant recipients.
A big part of this, the problem is the way the state wrote the grant. The state said that money could be used for community outreach. So not surprisingly, special interests are going, well, if we can just use the money for community outreach, give us the money, we'll take our cut for staff and overhead, we'll do some, community outreach and call it good. And of course, the state never goes back to see, did these things actually work? There was another project that was supposed to replace 20 wood-burning stoves. Wood-burning stoves are a source of air pollution, especially in Pierce and South King County, because they put up smoke and other things like that that can cause problems. But when I asked this project, okay, how many wood-burning stoves did you actually remove? They said 0, because people didn't want to give them up. So instead, they just wrote an online guide. So even projects that are supposed to do something good, I would say that removing wood-burning stoves or replacing them is a good strategy, could pay off in terms of improved air quality. Even projects like that ended up doing nothing. But is the state going to go back and check? Are they going to go back and claw back that money so that it's used to actually effectively reduce particulate matter? No, absolutely not.
So Myers said in the future, the state should, in his opinion, require all projects provide reasonable estimates. What did you really improve so far as air quality goes? How can we measure that? And he says you need to have accountability for projects such that if they fail to deliver, like you don't do any good for your overburdened community, but we, gave you a $500,000, you should pay that money back to ecology so they can, in fact, pay that grant out or award that grant to somebody who's actually going to make a tangible difference in air quality. So we'll see. Again, that article will be published on our Center Square Washington page before the end of Wednesday. So that is it for today's episode, this Earth Day episode of Washington in Focus Daily. I encourage you to check out our Center Square Washington page for these stories and more. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.